Okay, in this video we're going to talk about obtaining weight measurements on patients, and for this procedure we're going to use a physician's beam style scale. And I have right here with me a beam scale, but before we show you how to measure a patient's weight, we want to talk about how to read the equipment. We call it a beam scale because of this beam here and this beam down here. And want to draw your attention to this particular model, how you have numbers up here in the gray, and then you have on the bottom numbers in the black. Also, if you look down here, you have numbers that are up in the gray section and numbers that are in the bottom. The bottom would be metric kilograms, and we're not going to be measuring kilograms today, so we don't use the black up here or the black at the bottom. We're only measuring in the gray area. Okay? What I want to draw your attention to are the pounds. You can see that we have, for instance, 10 here, and then we have 12, and then we have 14. What you don't see is 11. You don't see the odd numbers, you only see even numbers. So you see 10, 12, 14. But if you look between 10 and 12, there's a solid large line that actually represents 11. And if you go past 12, between 12 and 14, that would be 13 pounds. And then between 14 and 16, that would be 15 pounds. And so you can see that they're only marked in even numbers, but they're actually calibrated in all numbers, both even and odd. You just have to remember that the odd numbers are not actually illustrated. There's just a line. So you have to be very careful not to miss that. So if your beam scale actually stops right there between the 2 and the 4, that little tiny notch is the arrow indicating that's the pound, then that would be 3. Between 2 and 4, that would be 3. So just be very careful as you're reading these calibrations that you're paying attention to where that little notch is. Down here at the bottom, we have measurements between in 50. So we have 0, we have over here 50, and then over here 100, and then 150. If I move this farther, you can see 200, 250, and 300. These numbers are larger because it allows us to get to the patient's weight a little faster. If your patient says my last known weight was 155, then we would take this bottom scale, beam or weight, and we'd place it on 150. But then, and you can see really carefully that the notch is pointing to the 150. Then if you look up here, let's say the patient was standing on the scale, you would slide this until it actually balances. And if the patient says my last known weight was 155, and today they also weigh 155, you remember you're at 150 on your large or your heavy beam, and then on the very light one you can see that between 4 and 6 that would be 5 pounds. Okay? And so the key to a beam scale is this little notch at the very end. The very end of this beam, you can see that there's a square here, a metal square, with this little notch sticking through the square. The goal is to get the notch or the beams to balance somewhere between this square, somewhere inside of the square. In other words, we don't want it pressing up or pressing down. We want it balanced somewhere in the middle. Once the balance has been set, the weights have been set, and the patient's weight has been determined, this will be balanced in the middle. If it's down, then you probably have too much weight, and you have to go down in weight. If it's up, you may not have enough weight, and you have to keep adding more until it actually balances. And this is why we call it a balance beam scale. It's all about getting this to balance inside of that square where it's not hitting the bottom, it's not hitting the top, but it's actually floating somewhere in the middle. We move these weights until we get it to balance. Now remember, the bottom one are increments of 50, so it's always a good idea to ask your patient what was your last known weight. Like let's say mine was 285. Well, I have the option to go to 200 or 250. Well, 250 is closer to 85, so I'm going to set that in the little notch that's associated with the 250. I'm going to set that in that little notch. You have to hear it click into the notch, and then I'm going to start adjusting this until this peg right here, this little notch, actually balances. Now, patients are very conscientious about their weight, so it's very important to maintain a very professional appearance, and to be very discreet, because patients are very conscientious of their weight. Sometimes patients will ask if they can remove their sweater, the things they have in their pocket, and some facilities will even allow you to remove their shoes, to take off some of that excess weight that we have on our person as we go throughout our day, and that's perfectly understandable. When you're done, you want to make sure that you take your weights and you push it all the way back to 0. And if I put this all the way back to 0, you're going to notice that it actually goes back to being balanced. Okay? So it's sort of floating, and it's looking for that last, I'll try to slow it down a little bit. As long as this is balanced, in other words, it's not up here or down there, it's just balanced somewhere in the middle, then we say that it's calibrated. A good medical assistant will actually look at this, make sure everything's zeroed out all the way to the left, and they'll look at this to make sure it's floating somewhere in the middle, which indicates that it's calibrated. And there's nothing worse than weighing yourself on a scale that's not calibrated. And so once you're done, you want to make sure you push all of the beam weights all the way to the left, so that you don't leave the last person's weight on there, which could be a violation of their privacy. We don't want other people to see what their weight was. Okay, thank you very much.